How's it going, fellas and the files? This is Dominic from Film Overload, the channel where we talk about movies, pop culture, and everything in between. I am back with another video and another rankings video, and today I will be ranking the entirety of the MCU. However, the thumbnail might have confused you, and you're probably wondering to yourself, why does it say there's 22 movies and there's like 27, 28 movies now? Well, in my canon, everything past Avengers Endgame doesn't count. I grew up with the MCU. I was 9 years old when Iron Man 1 came out back in 2008, and this universe really shaped who I was growing up as a person and just really taught me some actually very valuable lessons, and I loved all the characters and the films. And to see Disney ruin such a great cinematic universe like they have over the last couple of years, or over the past few years, I should say, is just a travesty. It really, really is. And so everything past Avengers Endgame, I don't count. However, I do have a list of films that I have watched past Avengers Endgame, and I will link that in the description below as well. In my opinion, the MCU ended with the events of Avengers Endgame. Everything past it just doesn't make any sense, and it just kind of retcons everything that came before it. So I don't count anything past Avengers Endgame canon, in my opinion, but that's just me. So today I will be ranking the not so great MCU films, and we're going to work our way from number 22 all the way up to number 12. Yes, as you can tell by the thumbnail, this is a two-part series, so keep an eye out for the next part, which I will be ranking then 11 all the way to number 1. Alright, once again, we are back in our trusty tier list maker website where I found all of the MCU films that came out between the years of 2008 and 2019, which is exactly what we are going for. And to kick off the very bottom of the barrel, the terrible portion of this tier list, in my opinion, the worst MCU film in my canon is Captain Marvel. Look, when this film came out and I saw it for the first time, I was like, okay, that was not awful. It wasn't good, but it wasn't awful either. And then I saw it again, and I really started to see just how much inspiration they took from Kelly Sue DeConnick's books, because, oh my gosh, this film is insufferable. The story is so bad. It just jumps everywhere. Now we see Carol as a youth, Carol as a pilot, Carol as this and that, and her trying to prove herself to Jude Law's character. We get to see Carol have this relationship with Marvel, who in my opinion they should have never ever gender swapped. And I already see the comments, oh, but they gender swapped the Ancient One. Well, I'll get to the Ancient One eventually when we get there, but they should have never gender swapped Marvel. That was the stupidest thing ever. Even though I really do enjoy Annette Bening as an actress, they should have never ever done that. That was just stupid. We get the introduction to Monica Rambeau, who we see later on in WandaVision. We get to see her relationship with Carol. We get to see Carol take on that really weird cat, the Flurkin or whatever they call it. We get to see Ronan, and just the story is such a mess. It jumps everywhere. I mean, it literally jumps everywhere. It's almost dizzying, the way I think about it. The film just is all over the place. The screenplay is just atrocious. I think Brie Larson really tried to bring that cocky energy, and she does, but she does it way too hard, and it just doesn't work. In my opinion, the reason why this film made so much money was because it was in between Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. If this movie was released in any other pocket of time in the MCU, that would have never made that much money. But because it was sandwiched in between two of the biggest movies that the franchise produced, that's why it made so much money. This film is terrible. Again, script is terrible. Brie Larson she plays a very insufferable character very well, because I was annoyed like crazy watching this for a second time by her and how she portrays Carol Danvers. Again, I really do enjoy Carol Danvers in the comics, but I can't subscribe to this film. It's so bad, and that's why I think it's the worst movie in the MCU. Now, here's my very first of a couple MCU hot takes, all right? And you may agree, you may disagree, and that's totally fine. Again, that's just cinema in general. It's all subjective. But in my opinion, this film just does not work at all. And personally, this is the film, in my opinion, that killed the MCU. And it also ushered in a new way of how the MCU makes their content now. And you can thank Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 for it. Look, I love Guardians of the Galaxy 1. That film is magical from start to finish. It is just perfection. So I was so excited to see this sequel when it first came out, and I walked out of my theater and I told myself, what the heck did I just sit through? Like Captain Marvel, the story is just everywhere. The story is everywhere. We follow the Guardians. We get to meet new characters like Mantis. We get to see Ego the Living Planet, which is personified somehow, even though he is a literal planet in the comic books. We get to see him being like a father figure to Peter, which I thought was really just out there. The story just felt kind of wobbly, kind of shaky, unlike the first Guardians of the Galaxy film. Yes, we get to see more development between like Gamora and her sister Nebula. We get to see just a couple of interesting little character developments in this film. But the thing that ultimately killed this film for me was not only the use of Ego the Living Planet and his whole arc with Peter, but it's the non-stop jokes every single 5 seconds. It is just, oh my gosh, I cannot stand every single 5 seconds there's a joke in this film, and you can't take the film seriously. And for some reason, Marvel thinks now that that's the template to make their content, which is why they're ultimately failing right now. But I think they really were trying to turn this group into like a comedic group, which, to be fair, yes, this group is funny. They're comedic. But to go so overboard to the point where you don't even have a story because you're so busy telling jokes is ridiculous. Ridiculous. Look, James Gunn, he tried to come up with something really cool. I dug the soundtrack in this film again, as he's so known for creating these great soundtracks for the Guardians of the Galaxy films. But this film just does not work. Again, story just doesn't work. The writing was way too joke heavy. The character arcs felt like they were kind of stagnant. Sure, there was a couple of like little developments here and there, again, between, like Gamora and Nebula and, Peter and Ego, which was, I just find it really weird. We get to see the sacrifice of Yondu, which I thought was really cool. The ending was really, really cool, and how Yondu sacrifices himself. Spoiler alert, sorry. But this film just does not work. It tries and tries and tries, and it just doesn't work. And that is why this film is number 21 in my MCU tier list. Moving on to number 20, we have yet another sequel to make the tier list, and that is Ant-Man and the Wasp. Once again, really enjoy the first Ant-Man. I love the comedic heist thriller kind of element to the first Ant-Man. I really thought that movie was really well done, and once again, I was looking forward to the sequel. And like Guardians of the Galaxy 2, they really went a little overboard with the jokes. I thought that the introduction of Hope Van Dyne as Wasp was mediocre. I really think Evangeline Lilly really tried to play a really good sidekick to Ant-Man. However, there are times where it feels like it's more Hope's movie than Scott's movie, which is really bizarre because, I don't know. I just felt like Ant-Man was kind of shoved to the side in a good chunk of this film for the sake of showing off what Wasp can do, which I thought was kind of you know, we get a mediocre villain in Ghost. I thought she was used very poorly. The Lawrence Fishburne character just, I don't know. I just thought he was kind of wasted also. Again, the side characters I think really carry this film. You know, that'd be Michael Pena and all those other guys. I thought they were really kind of like the glue to this film. Scott has a couple of good moments here and there. With Hank, we get to see Michelle Pfeiffer's character here, and we get to see all this other stuff. And this film also really introduced the concept of like another dimension, like a multiverse type thing. We all know what happens in the mid-credit scene, how it kind of linked into Infinity War, and just that whole thing. But once again here, the story is not very strong. It's not very structured. Again, they kind of try to use a little bit too much comedy here and there. I thought that the story kind of was overtaken by the comedic elements of the film. The characters were just kind of, thrown in there to be characters. And I don't know, it just didn't work for me. Mainly due to the story. And I understand, they had to tie it into Infinity War. They had to do this, and that to set up future events. But it felt very rushed. This film felt very, very rushed. And you can tell while watching it. And in my opinion, the film is not good, which is why this is number 20 on my MCU tier list. Coming in at number 19, we have another MCU hot take, in my opinion, that I have. And that is Thor Ragnarok. I don't see the appeal for this movie at all. In my opinion, this is the film that broke the Thor character. I think they were really going somewhere with Hemsworth's Thor, and then Taika Waititi just comes in and goes, "Oh, nope, we're going to turn him into a joke." And it was like, well, that's dumb, because you're clearly leading him through like this period of like more like a stoic nature, and I really missed the stoic Thor. I absolutely despise a comedic Thor. I hate comedic Thor so much. It's so bad and so cringy. And this film ultimately ruins Thor's character, in my opinion. We get to see the introduction of Valkyrie, which I can make a whole other video about Valkyrie, which I'm not going to. But Tessa Thompson, she tried, but the way she was written is just, it's stupid. It's so stupid. We get to see Thor and Hulk team back up again. We get to see some funny like Loki moments, and Loki really kind of developing into a more bigger character. I really thought that bond between Thor and him was really good in this film, I thought. And then we get Hela, which Hela, I haven't read too much of the Thor comic books. I've read a couple of them, but Hela just seems like a bland villain, which unfortunately is a lot of villains in the MCU. And I think Cate Blanchett really tried her best to really bring out like that really ominous, very almost lethal elements of Hela. I really think she tried. And Cate Blanchett is a fantastic actress. But the way she was written was just not good. The whole plot of Odin dying, this film is a headache. This film is a really big headache. And it's one of the first films where it was really all the visuals that carried the film and not the story, which is now like a main staple in the Marvel Cinematic Universe now. It's more style over substance. This film is really not good at all. It just completely contradicts what Thor was being built into, and that to me just was very off-putting and just very stupid. I thought Thor had some really solid potential, and they just turned him into an absolute joke. And so, yeah, this movie is not good, and that is why it is number 19 in my Marvel Cinematic Universe tier list. Coming in at number 18, we have a film that I thought had some serious potential, and it just dropped the ball entirely, and that is Iron Man 3. I really don't know why they went with Shane Black. They just should have stuck with Jon Favreau, and I think Jon would have brought something very interesting to this film, but unfortunately, this film just does not have anything going for it. Yes, we get the relationship dynamic between Tony and Pepper. We get a very interesting villain in Justin Hammer. We have the introduction of the Ten Rings, kind of, and the Mandarin, which I thought was a really, really bizarre way of showing a version of the Mandarin in that particular way. This movie just does not have anything going for it. Once again, the story is just very weak. All this film really does is tackle Tony's PTSD that he's feeling after the events of New York, and that's all this film really has going for it. I mean, it really doesn't have a lot of meat and potatoes, so to speak. It doesn't feel as deep as other MCU films. It just feels very hollow, and just felt like something that they had to make right after the Avengers film, and it just, I don't know, it just didn't really feel very authentic, if that makes any sense. I mean, it's authentic, obviously, but it just didn't have like that oomph that I'm looking for in an MCU film. And I'm not saying it's absolutely unwatchable. It's just not very fun to watch, and that is why I think this film is as low as it is on the tier list and my number 18. All right, moving on to the not good portion of this tier list. These are movies that are watchable but are clearly lacking a lot of things. And to kick off this portion of the tier list, I have to go with the movie that followed up Iron Man 3, and that is Thor: The Dark World. I used to think this was the weakest entry in the Thor franchise. Well, that's not the case anymore, but The Dark World is not good either. There are some very interesting elements in this film. We get the dynamic between Thor and Loki. We see them actually bond for the first time, really. We get the whole love story with, Jane and Thor. I guess Natalie Portman just can't step away from sappy romantic sequels.
His name was Paulo. We were both in the legislative youth program. He was a few years older than I. Very cute. Dark curly hair, dreamy eyes.
All right, I get the picture.
But it happens, there's a romance between the two of them. The villain Malekith is just, he's all right. He's not the best. I get the introduction of the reality. Yeah. We get the introduction of the reality stone, and the ether, or whatever you want to call it. We get that introduction of the aether or the reality stone. We get the introduction of that. We get Malekith's, we understand his wants with it. We know what he wants to do with it, and we see Thor battling him and his army, and we see the death of, the death of Thor's mother. We see, there's a bunch of things going on in this film, but I think the film tries to stuff too much into its runtime, and you really start to feel that about halfway through the film. It's fine. It's not good. It's really not that good. But it's a film that you can kind of put on in the background while you're working or studying or just, laying on the couch and scrolling through your phone. There isn't much going on in this film that impacts the universe as a whole, except the introduction of the Aether/Reality Stone. This film is not great. I personally think it's all right. It's not great, but it's not good, and that is why it's in this portion of the tier list and my number 17. Coming in at number 16, we have a film that is not as bad as I remember after a rewatch, and that is the Incredible Hulk film from 2008. When I first watched this film, I thought it was absolutely garbage, but when you compare this film to the garbage we are getting now from the MCU, it's not that bad, but it's still not very good either. And The Incredible Hulk is a very interesting film. It's the film that I think very first establishes where the MCU was headed, with that mid-credit scene with Robert Downey Jr. We get the kind of like the origin story of Bruce Banner. We get Edward Norton's Hulk, and I personally think that Norton would have been quite interesting down the road. I understand why he left. I mean, there was lots of different reports to why he left, but I would have really liked to have seen Norton throughout the entirety of the MCU, although I think Ruffalo is a not too bad of a replacement. But we get to see Bruce as a character. We get to see, through Norton's acting, we really do see just the inner conflict and turmoil that Bruce has within himself. He's very anxious. He has to constantly, check his heart rate and check all these things so that he doesn't, intentionally or unintentionally hurt people through the Hulk. And I really enjoyed that side of Bruce. In fact, I think the best part of this film is Edward Norton and Liv Tyler's chemistry together. They really were the glue of the entire film. We get a really interesting villain in Abomination. I thought Tim Roth really knocked that role out of the park. The final fight scene in the downtown area was, I thought, really well done. I thought the CGI holds up really, really well. For 2008, it really does hold up quite well. But unfortunately, it kind of suffers, the film overall suffers with the very fact that this was the MCU's very first, hurrah. They were very new with this universe, and they didn't know exactly where they were going with it, and you can tell. Most of Phase 1 are origin stories, and, they just kind of, wanted to see where it would go and how people would react. And I think the Hulk suffers from it being such an early entry in the MCU. If this was later down the road, if this film was released later down the road and they knew exactly what they were, where they were going, this film could have been really, really good. But I think it suffers from that really early portion, or that really early start to the MCU, and they didn't really know entirely where they were going with it. So overall, I think this film is not awful, but it's not good because of the reasons why I mentioned, making it my number 16. And finally, the last film on the not so good portion of the tier list is the sequel to Iron Man, and that is Iron Man 2. Yes, there are some really redeeming qualities to this film. We get to see the introduction of Black Widow, Scarlett Johansson. We get to see Whiplash, who I thought was a mediocre villain. We see Tony really wanting to create something bigger and really want to put a mark. He really wants to put a mark on the world. He really wants to put Stark Industry on everything. And you can kind of tell that his motives are really starting to develop in this film. But like I said with Hulk previously, I think this film really suffers because of how early it was in the MCU's life and them just not knowing entirely what to do with this universe. But I thought this film was not awful. It's just not good. And there's certain films, especially in the MCU, where you go, okay, that wasn't great. It was more of a popcorn flick, which, to be fair, most of these movies are popcorn flicks, but back when they still cared about telling a really good and cohesive story. And Iron Man 2 tells a very cohesive story. Unfortunately, the elements that they chose and, the writing it just didn't match up. And it's very off-putting, which is why I think Iron Man 2 is this low on the tier list and my number 15 overall. All right, moving on to the mid portion of this tier list. These are films that are not great and not bad. They're just meh. Smack dab right in the middle of the tier list. And to kick off the mid portion of this tier list, I'm going to put on there a film that I think is severely overrated, especially after I read the graphic novel, and that is Captain America Civil War. or Avengers 3, if you want to go that far. But Civil War is okay. It's okay. A lot of it was spoiled in the trailer, which I wish they had never put so much in the trailer. We get the conflict between Steve. We get the conflict between Tony, and we see both of their ideals clash, especially after their mission, with Scarlet Witch and what she does on accident that just topples an entire building. The civilians of the world are starting to realize that, hey, these guys are kind of scary because they can do things that no one else can, and they need to be controlled. So the government gets involved, and all these things happen. And so both sides, pick the side that they believe in, and they duke it out. And that's really much it. We get revealed that Winter Soldier was responsible for killing Tony's parents, which drives him even more over the edge, and wanting to kill Winter Soldier. And Captain America is like, no, he's my best friend. And that's where the line where Tony replies with, well, so was I. And there's a lot of emotions in this film. We get the introduction to Black Panther, to Prince T'Challa. We get the introduction of the Wakandan world. We get the introduction to Spider-Man. And oh my gosh, that's another thing that the trailer really did. They should have never, ever revealed Spider-Man in the trailer. Can you imagine the pop in every single theater if they kept Spider-Man a secret? Right after Tony says, under ruse, you see the web, and you're just like, oh my gosh, that would have been so cool if they would have left Spider-Man out of the trailer. And the pop in every single theater would have been insane. But unfortunately, they revealed him in the trailer, and I just think that, the Spider-Man character, a lot of people criticized Holland's version. I do agree. Yes, he is practically Tony's son, which I don't like either. I would much rather prefer him to be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man that we all know and love. But I think Tom really did the best he could with what he was given, especially in Civil War. Not easy jumping into right in the middle of a cinematic universe like that. It is not easy. And I think Tom gets severely, downplayed, but I think he's really solid as Spider-Man here. So we see both sides fight. We see them split away from each other. The division is there, and we get some really good character work between Tony and Steve and Bucky, and we get to see all these characters really kind of dig deep into their emotions and really dig deep into what they believe in as people. And I really do appreciate that about the film. Unfortunately, after reading the comic book, I'm sorry, the movie fight scenes don't compare at all to the graphic novel. The fight scenes in the comic book is so much better. They're so much better compared to the movie. And the fight scene in the movie does not last very long. And that's their entire marketing campaign, or that was their entire marketing campaign for this film. And which kind of let me down. But this film does set up, this film definitely sets up a lot of things, and I do appreciate it for those reasons. But unfortunately, especially after rewatching this, after reading the graphic novel, this film just, I think, was a little bit too blown out of proportion in terms of popularity and a little bit overhyped for me, making it the beginning of the mid portion of the tier list and my number 14. At number 13, we have another film that I think is very overrated, and that is Black Panther. I can very vividly remember when this film came out, Marvel treated this film as like a cultural experience. You have to see this film. It's a cultural experience. You have to see it, especially if you're Black. You have to see this film and all that stuff. And I was like, okay, I'll just go see it because it's a Marvel movie. It's okay. Another movie that's very just okay. We get to see the world of Wakanda for the first time, and we get to hear, the languages, and we get to see them wearing like their cultural like robes and the makeup and the, we get to see all of this world. We see this world developing right in front of our eyes. This film takes place right after Civil War, and we see T'Challa, played by the wonderful Chadwick Boseman, rest in peace. Great T'Challa. I thought he was great. He really brought a level of professionalism, and he really brought a very engaging energy to the role that I think no one will ever capture again. And yeah, Chadwick was just fantastic. I really dug what they did with this character. Him obtaining this huge kingdom right after the sudden death of his father. The news of the king's death, reaches many ears, especially Michael B. Jordan's Killmonger, which I think is a top 3 MCU villain. I think he is fantastic. I think he actually carries the film to a degree. I love Killmonger and T'Challa's banter. I really thought that was really well done. We get to meet Shuri, and we get to meet, all of these different characters. Daniel Kaluuya's character. We get to meet so many characters, and M'Baku, and just all these great characters that I thought had some serious potential, and they just kind of dropped the ball on all these characters. But I really do appreciate the world that this film creates. Director Ryan Coogler, I think, really knocked the overall scope and the scale of Wakanda perfectly. And we get to see, Claw in this film, which is Black Panther's biggest arch nemesis. But that's another stupid thing that this movie does. They kill both of Black Panther's biggest rivals in the same movie. Why would you do that? I mean, just use Claw for the first film and then use Killmonger for the second film, or vice versa. But no, let's just kill them both in the same movie, which is dumb. I really thought this movie was okay. The third act is very sloppy. The finale, the ending fight was very, very sloppy. I thought the movie ended kind of on a whimper. The first act is the best act, in my opinion. The middle of the movie is where it starts to kind of lose me, and then the third act was just kind of like thrown together as like a typical Marvel ending. I loved the production design of Wakanda. I thought that was brilliant. The costume design is fantastic. The hair and makeup, amazing. That wonderful musical score by Ludwig Göransson is outstanding. I loved the technical side of this film, but that's really all that this film really has to offer, unfortunately. This movie is mid. I don't have anything really else to say about it, and that is why it is my number 13. And the last movie of part 1 here, guys, is a film that I think is visually gorgeous, but the story could have been a little better, and that is Doctor Strange. I appreciate what this film was going for. I dug the story. I really did. The story was intriguing. I really enjoyed the writing. The writing was very good. I thought that Cumberbatch is the perfect Strange. I think Benedict Cumberbatch is the perfect Doctor Strange. He just brings that intelligence to the role. He really does it effortlessly. Like, he really just sinks into this character. And I believe that he really did his research with his character. A couple of those images of him, like, reading all of the comic books, like, when he's, like, not acting, or, like, he walks into, like, a comic book store in his robes. But this film is okay. The story was all right. The characters, I thought, were a little bit lackluster. I thought that Strange was the best character. I thought Tilda Swinton was okay as the Ancient One, and yes, the Ancient One was gender swapped, and even Kevin Feige, after that movie's release, regretted that he cast Tilda Swinton, not because of her acting ability. It was because that he wanted the character to be a little bit more accurate to the books. There's a whole Vanity Fair article about this, but I thought Tilda did the best that she could. but was a little bit lackluster in my opinion. Same with the villain. I thought the villains were okay. They weren't the greatest. The fight scenes were all right, but again, very heavily dependent on the CGI, because there's a lot of CGI in this film, and it can be very, very dizzying at times. I mean, because of all the different dimensions and all the different magic, and just there's so much going on. And again, just one of those films that really started to kind of tilt towards the style over substance. And this film is it's a fun ride. It's a fun film. I wouldn't say it's a really, really fun film, but it's a fun film. A lot of, good twists and turns here and there, and, it works. This film works. So that's really why I think it's in the middle of this tier list. Again, not great, not bad, but just good. And that is why it is my number 12 on the tier list. So that ends part 1 of the MCU rankings. That was a lot of fun, kind of going back and revisiting all of these films that I grew up with. Part 2 will cover movies number 11 all the way up to number 1. So guys, if you want to see part 2 and want to see more forms of content like this, hit that like button. Also hit subscribe while you're at it, and turn on the post notifications so that you guys can get notified every single time that I post a video. You can follow me on Letterboxd, which is right here. I post all of my movie reviews on Letterboxd, as it helps me keep track of movies that I have watched, movies that I haven't watched, and movies that I will watch. And I think you guys will benefit greatly from this app and this website if you are indeed lovers of cinema like myself. As always, guys, happy movie watching. Take care.